Imagine waking up one morning to find a letter on your doorstep, not a friendly note from a neighbor, but a threat. Not from the government, not from the police, but from the very association that's supposed to protect your community. Over what? A trash can. Yes, a single trash can left outside for too long. What starts as a petty warning spirals into legal threats, mediation fees, and a battle for control that could cost you hundreds, even thousands of dollars. This isn't just a story about garbage. It's a story about power, fear, and the hidden nightmare of living under an HOA. It always starts with a letter, not a friendly letter. Not a handwritten note from a neighbor or a birthday card from family. No, this is the kind of letter that makes your stomach tighten before you even tear it open. It's official, impersonal. The envelope is thin, but heavy with threat. A return address stamped with the name of the Homeowners Association, printed in all caps like the label on a government form. That's what Alex, let's call him, that found in his mailbox one Tuesday morning. He carried it inside without thinking, tossed it on the kitchen counter while pouring coffee, and only opened it when he sat down, and that's when the day shifted. The words jumped out at him in bold, his brow furrowed. He scanned the first paragraph, his eyes darting past the stiff legal jargon until they landed on the familiar word, violation. He read on. The violation, it said, concerned trash cans. Alex actually laughed out loud, a bitter, incredulous laugh that filled the empty kitchen. A trash can? Are you kidding me? The letter went on. You are hereby offered pre-suit mediation to resolve this long-standing violation. Failure to comply will result in litigation. A list of mediators and their hourly rates is enclosed. Alex flipped to the next page. A neat little table listed names and phone numbers, followed by hourly rates that made his head spin. $250 an hour. $300. One mediator charging nearly $400. He pushed the paper away and rubbed his face with both hands. This has to be a mistake, he muttered, but it wasn't. This was the culmination of a saga that had begun more than a year ago with nothing more than a plastic bin full of weak cold garbage. Back in April 2022. It was a normal Thursday morning. Trash day. Alex rolled the green plastic bin down to the curb before work. Inside were the usual suspects: pizza boxes, coffee grounds, food wrappers, the detritus of a busy life. The sanitation truck came, emptied the can, and rolled on. But the can stayed put. Maybe Alex was late getting home. Maybe he was tired and forgot. Maybe he thought he'd get it in the morning. Whatever the reason, the can lingered by the curb overnight. Then, another day. It wasn't an eyesore. Exactly. Just one bin, standing at the edge of the driveway like a soldier who hadn't been called back inside. But to the HOA, it might as well have been a crime scene. The first notice 2 days later. Alex found a piece of paper taped to his front door. Homeowner at address. You are in violation of Article 7, Section 3 of the HOA Covenant. Refuse containers. Must be stored out of public view, except on designated collection days. You have 7 days to correct this issue. Failure to comply may result in fines and legal action. Alex read it, sighed, and immediately wheeled the can into the garage. He wasn't looking for trouble. Still, he figured it was worth calling the HOA, just to be sure. He dialed the number at the bottom of the notice. HOA office. How can I help you? A flat voice answered. Yeah, this is Alex over at address. I got a violation notice about the trash can. It's put away now. Just wanted to make sure it's marked resolved. The woman on the other end barely paused. Okay, no problem. I'll mark it down as resolved. And that was that. Or so Alex thought. The months passed. Summer came and went. Fall brought cooler weather. Holiday plans. The usual. Every week. Alex took the trash out on collection day and rolled the can back in that evening. Sometimes he was late, sure, but never more than a few hours. Nothing out of the ordinary. He never saw another notice on his door. Never got a phone call. Never received an email. As far as he knew, the issue was long behind him. Until it wasn't, because according to the HOA, Alex had ignored them. They claimed they'd sent not one, not two, but multiple warnings in the months after April. Letters mailed to his home. Notifications sent through their community app. But Alex never saw them. Not a single one. When the mediation letter arrived, nearly a year later, it included copies of the warnings he was supposed to have received. His name, his address, neatly typed dates in the corner. He stared at them in disbelief. Where were these? Pocum, I never got them. Lost in the mail, misdelivered, glitches in the app. Or maybe never sent at all. He couldn't prove it. He couldn't disprove it either, and that's the trap. Because in disputes with the HOA, the only thing that matters is the paper trail, and the HOA controls the paper. And so, Alex found himself staring at a bill for mediation. Not a fine, not a late fee, but a demand to pay hundreds of dollars just to sit down and resolve the violation. A violation. He thought bitterly, that had already been resolved a year ago, when he put the trash can back in the garage. It was surreal, absurd, like being told you owed hundreds of dollars because you sneezed too loudly in public. But this was no joke. This was the HOA, and the HOA doesn't joke. Alex kept staring at the letter. On his kitchen table, the words Pursuit Mediation sat there in heavy black ink, cold and unyielding. He reread it 3 times, hoping it would somehow mean something different if he looked at it again, but it never did. It always ended the same way. Pay hundreds of dollars for mediation, or risk being dragged into court over a trash can. He thought back to that first violation in April 2022. The absurdity of it still burned in his mind. One trash can, left outside too long, and suddenly he was a criminal in the eyes of the HOA. He had called them right away. He had done the responsible thing. They told him it was resolved. He even remembered the tone of the woman's voice, so casual, so dismissive, almost as if she had been annoyed that he even bothered to call Dot. But now, months later, that same violation had grown into something else, something bigger, something scarier. The HOA claimed they had sent him warnings, several, in fact, letters, emails, app notifications. But he never got them, not a single one. He flipped through the packet they had sent with the mediation letter. Inside were photocopies of those so-called warnings. They looked official, date stamped, addressed to him, written in the same stiff legal language as the first notice. But they were strangers to him. He had never seen them before in his life. His hands clenched as he held the papers. It felt like being gaslit on a bureaucratic scale. Here were documents that said he had been warned multiple times, and yet he knew those warnings never reached him. It was like arguing with a ghost. That's the cruel genius of an HOA. They live and die by paperwork. If they say a letter was sent, then in their world, it was sent. Whether it arrived or not doesn't matter. Whether you saw it or not doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is their record. Their word on paper carries more weight than your lived reality. And now, because of their paper trail, Alex was trapped. He thought about ignoring it. What would happen if he just tossed the letter in the trash and pretended it didn't exist? But he knew the answer. It wouldn't go away. The HOA would escalate. They always did. The next step would be court, then fines, then attorney's fees, then a lien on his house. He had read enough horror stories online to know how quickly these things could spiral out of control. So what were his options? Pay for mediation. Hire a lawyer. Either way, it was hundreds, maybe thousands of dollars, all over something as small and stupid as a garbage bin left at the curb for too long. He stood up from the table and paced his kitchen. His mind replayed stories he had read on Reddit, on news sites, in whispered conversations with coworkers. Stories of HOS gone mad. The family fined thousands for having a swing set in the backyard. The veteran told to take down his American flag because it wasn't aesthetically consistent. The woman threatened with foreclosure because she planted the wrong color flowers. And now, his story wasn't a swing set or a flag. It wasn't flowers or lawn paint. It was a trash can. Just one. The thought made him laugh again, but this time the laugh was sharp, hollow. He imagined himself sitting in a sterile office across from a mediator, a lawyer from the HOA on the other side of the table, everyone speaking in hushed, professional tones about the scandalous crime of a plastic bin left at the curb. He could almost hear it. Mr. Alex, the association takes property values very seriously. When you fail to put away your refuse container in a timely manner, it impacts the entire community. Your actions are, in this case, your inactions cannot go unaddressed. The absurdity of it was overwhelming. Here he was, being painted as some sort of villain, when all he had done was forget to roll a bin back into his garage one busy week. But absurdity didn't matter. The HOA didn't care how silly it looked. They didn't care that he was a good neighbor, that his yard was tidy, that he paid his dues on time. They only cared about enforcing the rules. And once the machine was in motion, it didn't stop. Alex poured himself another coffee, but his hand shook as he lifted the mug. He felt the stress in his chest, a tightness that wasn't there yesterday. He thought about calling them, just picking up the phone, and demanding an explanation. But he knew how that would go. He'd be placed on hold, passed from one indifferent voice to another, and told the same thing over and over. The violation is on record. The warnings were sent. Mediation is required. There would be no apology, no acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, the system had failed him. Because HOS don't fail. At least, not in their own eyes. He sat back down at the table and looked at the letter again. It seemed almost ridiculous that such a flimsy sheet of paper could carry so much weight, but it did. That letter was a chain, a threat, a financial time bomb waiting to go off. He picked up his phone and scrolled through his messages. Nothing from the HOA, not a single notification. He opened the HOAS app. It spun for a moment, then crashed. He tried again. Same thing. He almost laughed. Here was the app that was supposedly his main line of communication, and it couldn't even load. His mind drifted back to the day he first moved into the neighborhood. Back then, the HOA had seemed like a minor nuisance at best. They promised to maintain standards, protect property values, create a harmonious community. He hadn't thought much about it. Everyone around him seemed fine. The lawns were neat. The houses looked good. The HOA fees weren't outrageous. But now, years later, the mask had slipped. The HOA wasn't a guardian of community, it was a machine. Cold, bureaucratic, relentless, and he had gotten caught in its gears. He thought about fighting back, hiring a lawyer, dragging the HOA into their own battle. But lawyers cost money too, and the idea of spending thousands of dollars in legal fees over a trash can made him feel sick. He thought about paying for mediation, just to make it all go away. But why should he? Why should he fork over hundreds of dollars when he did nothing wrong? And so he sat there, trapped between pride and practicality. Outside, the trash can stood, quietly by the side of the house, oblivious to the chaos it had caused. A $45 piece of plastic, now the centerpiece of a legal battle. Alex shook his head slowly, almost in disbelief. This wasn't about a trash can anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. This was about power, about control, about an organization that thrived on rules and punishments, turning neighbors into adversaries and homeowners into defendants. And as he stared at the letter one more time, he knew this was just the beginning. That night, Alex barely slept. He lay awake staring at the ceiling, the letter replaying in his head like a broken record. Each time he closed his eyes, the bold words flashed again. Pre-suit mediation required. At 2 in the morning he got out of bed and walked through the dark house. He checked the locks, wandered into the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water he didn't drink. On the counter, the letter still sat where he had left it. A silent reminder that tomorrow would not be like yesterday. He thought about calling his neighbor, Mark, who lived 3 houses down. Mark had been in the neighborhood longer, maybe a decade or more. He always seemed to know the gossip, the inside scoop on how the HOA really worked. But Alex hesitated. What would he even say? Hey Mark, did you ever get threatened with mediation? Over a trash can? It sounded insane. And yet, here he was, by morning, he couldn't take it anymore. He needed answers. Coffee in hand, he sat at his laptop and typed, HOA trash can violation mediation into Google. The results were both comforting and terrifying. Comforting, because he wasn't alone. Terrifying, because the stories he found were worse than his own. There was the woman in Texas who nearly lost her house because she racked up fines for having a garbage bin visible from the street. There was the military family in California fined thousands for leaving their bins out while the father was deployed overseas. There was even a man in Florida who ended up in a full-blown lawsuit because the HOA claimed he repeatedly left his can out for excessive durations, sometimes as little as a few hours. Alex read until his stomach turned, page after page, of people just like him, caught in the gears of the HOA machine. The pattern was always the same: a minor issue, a notice, claims of repeated violations, escalating fees, legal threats. The details varied: bins, fences, paint colors, weeds, but the story was the same. Once the HOA had you in their sights, there was no easy escape. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. Was this his fate now? To become another one of those stories, whispered on forums and shared as cautionary tales. He wasn't a troublemaker, he wasn't careless. He had done everything right, or at least he thought he had. But none of that mattered. He decided to call the HOA after all. He rehearsed what he would say in his head. Calm, measured, reasonable. He would explain the situation. He would remind them that he called back in April 2022 and was told it was resolved. He would demand to know why he never received the supposed warnings. He would ask no, insist that they dismiss this ridiculous mediation demand. The phone rang 6 times before a voice answered. Homeowners Association office, the woman said, flat and unbothered. This is Alex from address. He began. His voice trembled despite his attempt to sound calm. I received a letter yesterday about pre-suit mediation. It says it's for a trash can violation from last year. I already fixed that and called to confirm it was resolved. Why am I still being contacted about this? There was a pause as the woman clicked on her keyboard. Yes, I see here you were cited in April 2022. And additional notices were sent in June, August, and November. The violation remains unresolved. Alex felt his blood pressure spike. Unresolved. I put the trash can away the same day I got the first notice. I called your office. I was told it was taken care of. I understand, sir, but according to our records, the violation persisted. I never received any of those additional notices. Not by mail, not by email, not on your app. How can you claim I ignored warnings I never got? The woman's tone didn't change. All correspondence was sent to the address on file. We cannot be responsible for whether or not you check your mail or app notifications. The records show the notices were sent. That is sufficient. Alex gripped the phone tighter. So because you claim you sent something, I'm automatically guilty, even though I never saw it. Sir, the matter has already been escalated to mediation. At this point, your options are to schedule mediation with one of the approved mediators, or allow the case to proceed to litigation. Would you like me to send you the list of mediators again? It was like talking to a wall. No empathy, no logic, no acknowledgement of his reality. Just cold bureaucracy. Repeating the script, he hung up before he said something he'd regret. His hand shook as he set the phone down. He felt a wave of helpless rage. It wasn't just the unfairness of it, it was the complete lack of recourse. They had their paperwork, they had their records, and in the eyes of the system, that was all that mattered. For the rest of the day he couldn't focus on anything else. He tried working from home, but the numbers on his screen blurred together. His mind kept drifting back to the trash can standing quietly outside, a plastic container, now transformed into a weapon the HOA could use against him. By evening, the stress had turned into exhaustion. He slumped onto the couch and turned on the TV, but the noise only made his headache worse. He muted it and sat in silence. He wondered how it had come to this. When he bought his house, the HOA seemed like nothing more than a minor nuisance. A few rules about lawns and fences. A monthly newsletter no one read. An app that never worked, right? But now it was something else, something bigger, something he couldn't ignore. It felt less like a neighborhood association and more like a shadow government. They had the power to fine him, to drag him into mediation, even to put a lien on his home if he didn't comply. They were, in effect, his landlords even, though he owned the house, and that was the cruelest irony of all. He bought the house to be free of landlords, to have a place of his own, to live without someone telling him what he could and couldn't do. But here he was, years later, realizing that the HOA had simply replaced the landlord. Different name, same control. He thought again about the horror stories he had read online. Families losing their homes over unpaid HOA fines. Veterans humiliated over flags. Children's chalk drawings washed away with chemical cleaner because they violated community aesthetics. All of it done in the name of protecting property values. What was a property value worth if it came at the cost of constant surveillance? What was the point of living in a house if you couldn't live in it freely? The questions kept swirling in his head until his eyelids grew heavy. He dozed off on the couch, the mediation letter still lying on the table beside him. Waiting like a ticking clock the next morning, Alex woke up with a stiff neck from the couch. For a few seconds he didn't remember where he was, what day it was, or why his stomach felt heavy with dread. But then his eyes landed on the letter, still on the table, and reality came rushing back. He sat up slowly, rubbing his face with both hands. His phone buzzed with a notification, a work email. He tried to care, but the words blurred together. Deadlines, meetings, projects. None of it mattered when the thought of the HOA loomed like a shadow over his entire life. He needed advice. Real advice, not the scripted responses from the HOA office. He opened Reddit again, scrolling through our HOA and our legal advice, searching for someone who had been through this exact nightmare. He found dozens of threads. Some people paid the mediation fee just to make it go away. Others hired lawyers and fought, sometimes winning, sometimes losing even more money than they started with. A few ignored it and regretted it when liens were filed against their homes. Buried in the comments, one line stuck out. With HOAs, it's never about the violation. It's about control. Once they escalate, you're not arguing about trash cans or weeds anymore. You're arguing about power. Alex read that line over and over. It rang true. The trash can didn't matter. The timing didn't matter. The missed notices didn't matter. The HOA had decided to assert power, and the mediation was simply their way of tightening the leash. He stood up and looked out the window. Across the street, his neighbor, Mrs. Diaz, was pulling weeds from her flower bed, 2 houses down. Kids rode bikes in circles, laughing, free in ways adults no longer were. To any outsider, the neighborhood looked perfect. Tidy lawns, matching mailboxes, cars parked neatly in driveways. But Alex saw something else now. He saw the invisible pressure, the constant weight of rules, the unspoken threat that at any moment, anyone could become the next target. He thought about Mrs. Diaz, about Mark, about the family with kids. Were they all just living quietly, hoping the spotlight never turned on them? How many others had already been burned, but kept their stories quiet out of fear or shame? By noon he decided to walk over to Mark's place. The older man answered, the door in shorts and a faded t-shirt, holding a can of soda. Hey Alex, what's up? Got a minute? Alex asked. They sat on Mark's porch, the afternoon sun beating down. Alex explained everything, the original violation, the phone call he made, the lack of notices, the mediation demand. Mark listened without interrupting, his brow furrowed deeper with each detail. When Alex finished, Mark let out a long sigh. Yeah, I'm not surprised you're not. Mark shook his head. This board's been a mess for years. They're strict when they feel like it, lazy when they don't. Some violations they ignore completely. Others they ride into the ground. It depends on who's on the committee that month and who's got a bone to pick. Alex blinked. So it's personal. Sometimes, Mark said, sipping his soda. Other times, it's just routine. They have quotas. You know. They want to show they're enforcing the rules so they don't look useless. Trash cans are easy targets. Visible, obvious, low-hanging fruit. Alex rubbed his temples. So what do I do? Mark shrugged. Depends how much fight you've got in you. You could pay for mediation? Expensive, yeah, but it might shut them up. Or you could lawyer up and push back. Risky, though they've got deeper pockets than you. Either way, you're in for a ride. Once they escalate, they don't like backing down, makes them look weak. The pit in Alex's stomach deepened. He had hoped Mark would offer some magic solution, some trick to make it all vanish. Instead, he confirmed the worst. The HOA wasn't a machine that could be reasoned with. It was a machine that only moved forward, never back. As Alex walked home, he couldn't shake the thought. Maybe this wasn't just about his trash can. Maybe it was bigger than that. Maybe it was about the very idea of HOAs themselves, tiny empires ruling over ordinary people, disguising power grabs as community standards. That night, he drafted a letter. Not to the HOA, but to himself. A way to organize his thoughts, to release some of the anger building inside him. He wrote about the violation, about the notices he never got, about the mediation letter. But he also wrote about what it meant. About how something as small as a trash can could snowball into legal threats. About how HOAs claimed to protect property values but ended up turning neighbors into enemies. He wrote until his hand cramped. When he finished, he sat back and read it aloud. It sounded less like a personal grievance and more like a manifesto, a warning to anyone who thought HOAs were harmless. For the first time in days, he felt a spark of clarity. The HOA had power, yes, but so did he. His voice, his story, those were weapons too. If nothing else, he could shine a light on what was happening. The next morning he posted his story to Reddit. Not just the basics, but the whole truth, the timeline, the missed notices, the phone call, the mediation demand. Within hours, comments flooded in. Same thing happened to me. They tried to fine me $500 for leaving my recycling bin out overnight. HOAs are legalized extortion. You need to get a lawyer, but also document everything. Record calls, save every letter, keep a log. Some offered advice. Others shared their own nightmares. Many simply offered solidarity. Alex read each comment, feeling a strange mix of comfort and outrage. Comfort in knowing he wasn't alone. Outrage in realizing just how common this was. By evening, his post had thousands of upvotes. It spread to other subreddits, even got screenshotted on Twitter. Strangers from across the country chimed in. Some angry, some sympathetic, some just shaking their heads at the absurdity of it all. And then something unexpected happened. A local journalist messaged him. They were working on a piece about HOAs and wanted to hear more about his story. Alex hesitated. Did he really want to put his name out there? To poke the bear even harder. But then he thought of that line he'd read. It's never about the violation. It's about control. Maybe the best way to fight control was to expose it. So he said yes. The interview was short, just half an hour on the phone, but Alex poured his heart out. He told the journalist everything, from the trash can to the threats of mediation. He described the stress, the sleepless nights, the absurdity of being treated like a criminal over a plastic bin. The journalist listened carefully, asking sharp questions, clearly sensing the bigger story. A week later, the article was published. The headline jumped out at him. Local homeowner threatened with legal action over trash can. Is the HOA system out of control? The piece was balanced, quoting the HOA's bland statements about protecting community standards. But it gave far more space to Alex's side. It painted him not as a careless rule breaker, but as an ordinary man caught in the gears of a petty, bureaucratic machine. The story spread quickly. Local news picked it up. People shared it online. Suddenly, Alex wasn't just a homeowner with a problem. He was a symbol. And that's when the HOA came knocking. The knock came on a Tuesday evening, sharp, deliberate, not the friendly kind neighbors use. Alex opened the door to find two members of the HOA board standing on his porch. Both wore stiff smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Mr. Johnson, one began, we'd like to speak with you about the recent publicity. Alex folded his arms. You mean the article? Yes, it has caused some concern among the board. We don't believe it accurately represents our community. Alex felt his pulse quicken, but he stood his ground. It represented my experience. If you think it's inaccurate, maybe ask yourselves why so many people are saying the same thing. The second board member's smile tightened. Regardless, we'd prefer if you refrain from speaking to the media in the future. Matters like this should be handled privately, within the community. There it was again, control, the demand for silence. The expectation that residents would bow their heads and obey. Alex shook his head slowly. No, if you can send me threats over a trash can, I can tell my side. That's not negotiable. For a moment, the two men just stared at him. Then, without another word, they turned and walked away, their forced smiles gone. When the door shut, Alex let out a long breath. His hands were trembling, but not from fear, from adrenaline. For once, he hadn't folded. For once, he had told them no. The next few weeks were tense. The HOA didn't drop the mediation demand, but something had shifted. Perhaps it was The media coverage. Perhaps it was the board realizing that pursuing a legal case over a garbage bin made them look absurd. Either way, the tone of their letters softened. The threats grew vague. The urgency faded, but at the same time, neighbors began approaching Alex privately. Mrs. Diaz admitted she'd been fined for her flowers being too tall. A young couple whispered that the board had hassled them about their car being parked half an inch over the driveway line. Another man said he'd been billed for repainting his fence even though the paint was less than 2 years old. One by one, the stories piled up. Each one was a reminder that Alex's case wasn't unique, it was systemic. The HOA wasn't protecting the community, it was policing it, and everyone lived in fear of being next. Then something remarkable happened. At the next HOA meeting, residents showed up in force. Dozens of them, more than anyone could remember. They sat in the back rows, arms crossed, waiting. When the board tried to move through its usual agenda, landscaping, pool maintenance, budget updates, the residents spoke up. They asked about fines, about notices that never arrived, about selective enforcement, about legal threats over minor issues. The board tried to maintain order, but the momentum had shifted. The residents weren't scared anymore. They were angry. They were united by the end of the meeting. A petition had started circulating. It called for new elections, new leadership, and more transparency. Alex signed it, his name bold on the first page. Dozens more followed. The weeks that followed weren't easy. The board resisted, lawyers got involved, but the pressure didn't let up. The community had tasted what it felt like to push back, and there was no going back to silence. Eventually, elections were held. Several board members were voted out. New, more reasonable neighbors took their place. Policies were reviewed, fines reduced, enforcement made consistent. It wasn't perfect, HOAs never are, but it was better. And the trash can, that ridiculous, cursed trash can that started it all. It sat in Alex's garage, plain and unremarkable, no longer the symbol of doom it had once been. Sometimes, when he wheeled it out to the curb, he'd laugh to himself. How absurd it had all been. How close he'd come to losing peace of mind, maybe even his home, over a piece of molded plastic. But it hadn't been for nothing. Because of that trash can, the community had woken up. Neighbors had spoken out. Change had happened. One night, months later, Alex sat on his porch, sipping a cold drink as the sun went down. Kids rode bikes in the street. Mrs. Diaz tended her flowers. Mark waved from across the way. The neighborhood looked the same as it always had. Tidy lawns, matching mailboxes, cars neatly parked. But beneath the surface, it felt different. Lighter, freer. Alex smiled. The fight wasn't easy. It wasn't pretty, but it mattered. And if anyone ever asked him what it was like to live under an HOA, he'd tell them the truth. It's never about the trash can, it's about power. And sometimes, the only way to win is to refuse to be silent.